The morning I learned I legally controlled the water of a 1940-acre lake, I thought it would fix my life. What it actually did was put a target on my back. And the first shot wasn't a lawsuit or a shouting match. It was a fluorescent notice slapped on my truck like I was a teenager parked in the wrong spot. I was standing at the edge of the water just after sunrise, watching mist slide across the surface like slow smoke when a luxury SUV tore down my gravel road as if it owned the place. It stopped inches from my old wooden dock, the one my family built generations ago, and out stepped a woman dressed like authority itself. Perfect posture, expensive sunglasses, clipboard held tight like a weapon. "I'm Vanessa Hartwell," she said, already writing before I'd even spoken. "President of the Lakeshore Ridge Homeowners Association." Then she angled the clipboard toward my dock, like she was presenting evidence in court. "This structure is non-compliant. You'll need to remove it within 30 days, she said, and didn't pause long enough for me to breathe. "Also, there's a mandatory monthly lake usage assessment, $700. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. "You're charging me," I said. Slow, pointing past her shoulder at the water behind her to use a lake that came with my inheritance. She didn't blink. "The lake is considered a shared community resource," she said, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "All shoreline owners are subject to association oversight." And that's when it hit me sharp and cold. She had no idea what I actually owned. 6 weeks earlier, I was just Daniel Cross. 43, freshly divorced, the kind of tired where you can sleep 8 hours and still wake up exhausted. I'd walked away from a technical career that paid well but ate my life downsized into a rental with furniture that didn't match and told myself I was starting over, like that phrase meant anything. Then my great-aunt passed away, and a law office I'd never heard of called me like they were reading a script. I sat in a sterile conference room while an attorney slid a stack of documents across the table, papers older than most of the town. And buried in there was a deed that didn't just transfer land. It transferred water rights, depth control, shoreline authority rights, written long before zoning boards laminated bylaws or anyone with a clipboard started calling themselves leadership. So when Vanessa slapped that fluorescent notice onto my windshield like a threat wrapped in paper, I didn't just feel annoyed. I felt something worse. That old familiar helplessness. The one that had shown up during my divorce when it felt like every decision got made in a room I wasn't allowed into. Vanessa turned away like the conversation was over. "Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential legal action," she said. And then she was walking back to her SUV like she'd just issued a weather report. I peeled the notice off once she was gone. The paper felt heavier than it should have. As I stood there, neighbors slowed their cars as they passed, pretending not to stare, but I could feel the question hanging in the air. Was I the next one they'd break? By the end of that week, the quiet lake I'd just inherited turned into a battlefield made of envelopes, deadlines, and threats printed in bold ink. Certified letters started arriving like clockwork: structural inspections, environmental reviews, administrative processing fees I'd never agreed to. Every page ended the same way. Failure to comply would trigger daily penalties. It was obvious what Vanessa Hartwell was doing. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was trying to exhaust me before I understood the game. One night I spread the letters across my kitchen counter and stared at them until my eyes burned. The language was dense on purpose: bylaws, subsections, references, designed to intimidate, not inform. And I'll be honest, I almost caved. Not because I believed I was wrong, because I was so tired of fighting systems that didn't care what was fair, only what was convenient. I caught myself thinking, maybe I should just rip the dock out, pay the fee, keep my head down. Maybe I should stop making waves, which, considering I owned the lake, felt like a cruel joke. I stood in my kitchen alone and actually whispered, "What if I'm the problem?" And the second the words left my mouth, I hated myself for them. Because deep down I knew what this was: bullying with paperwork. So I stopped reacting and started verifying. 2 days later, I was in the lowest level of the county records building, a place that smelled like dust toner and forgotten arguments. Metal shelves stretched in rows that made you feel small on purpose. I requested every historical filing tied to my property and sat there while a clerk rolled out carts stacked with documents that looked like they'd survived wars. Hours passed. Then something clicked. There it was, the original transfer record tied to my family name. Not amended, not superseded, not overridden. The document outlined rights extending beneath the lake bed itself, granting control over water usage, shoreline access, long-term stewardship across what was now measured at 1,940 acres. More importantly, the language predated every authority Vanessa kept citing. The Homeowners Association didn't override my rights. My rights existed outside of them. Driving home, the lake looked different. Not just peaceful, grounded, like it had outlasted every attempt to control it from the outside. That evening I was checking the dock supports when an older woman approached from 2 houses down. "I'm Ruth," she said, and her voice was quiet in that way people get when they've learned that speaking too loudly makes you a target. 76. Been here longer than the association. She glanced up the road like she expected Vanessa's SUV to appear out of thin air. "She's done this before," Ruth said. "Targets people one at a time, pushes until they sell or leave. No one ever fights back." That explained the looks. That night my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mandatory association meeting. Special session. Attendance required." I stared at the screen and let out a laugh that didn't have any humor in it. Emergency meetings weren't about governance. They were about control. And control only tightened when it started slipping. The moment I walked into that meeting, I knew it wasn't about rules. It was a show. Folding chairs, crammed into a community hall under buzzing fluorescent lights. Stale coffee smell, nervous murmurs. People avoided eye contact like they didn't want to get infected by proximity. At the front stood Vanessa, perfectly composed, flanked by board members who looked like they'd memorized talking points, but not much else. A projector hummed behind her, displaying grainy photos of my dock from awkward angles. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We're facing a serious compliance issue that threatens safety and property values." There it was, fear wrapped in professionalism. She clicked through slides like she was giving a sales pitch. Outdated, environmentally questionable, liability for everyone. And I waited. Not because I was scared, because I was done giving her the emotional reaction she wanted. When she finally paused, I stood. "Before this goes any further," I said, keeping my voice calm, "we need to talk about jurisdiction." The room went quiet in a way that makes every cough sound loud. Vanessa's smile tightened like someone pulling a string. "This meeting isn't the place for individual disputes," she said quickly. "I disagree," I said, "especially when fees, penalties, and enforcement are being discussed." I held up a folder, not dramatic, not theatrical, just enough for everyone to notice it existed. "The property I inherited includes documented water rights covering approximately 1,940 acres, I said. "Those rights were established long before this homeowners association existed." Murmurs rippled through the room like wind across water. One board member leaned toward another, whispering. Someone in the back said, "Is that true?" Vanessa straightened like she'd been caught mid-lie. "Those documents are outdated and irrelevant," she snapped. "The association has recognized oversight over properties that fall under its authority." "I'm sure it does," I said, and then I sat down. "Mine doesn't." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just watched. And that's when I saw it, the crack. Not anger. Uncertainty. The meeting ended abruptly after that. No vote, no resolution. Just a vague promise of review and a rushed adjournment that felt more like retreat than closure. As people filed out, a few neighbors slowed near me. One nodded. Another whispered. About time someone said something. Vanessa didn't look at me as she left, but I could feel her recalculating. The next morning, engines woke me up. I looked out the window and counted 3 official-looking vehicles lined along my driveway. Clipboards, reflective vests, the whole production. By the time I stepped outside, they were already at work. A building inspector measured the dock. An environmental officer collected water samples with exaggerated care. A third guy hovered near my septic area like he expected it to explode. "We've received multiple complaints," one of them said, not unkindly. "We're required to investigate anonymous complaints." Of course you are, I thought. And of course Vanessa had made sure it looked official, because bullies love uniforms when they're not wearing them themselves. I nodded, said nothing, and pulled out my phone. Timestamps, faces, vehicle numbers. Years of dealing with systems taught me one thing. If someone sends officials after you, you create a record. They spent hours combing my property, and the longer they stayed, the more uncomfortable they looked. Finally, the building inspector, his tag read, Red Elliott, walked over and wiped sweat off his forehead. "Off the record," he said quietly, "this dock meets current safety standards better than most we see." The environmental officer confirmed the same. No contamination, no disruption, no violations. In other words, nothing Vanessa accused me of actually existed. That afternoon, a patrol car slowed near my property, and the deputy stepped out. He glanced at the vehicles, then at me, and gave me a look that said he'd seen this kind of thing before. "Getting popular," he said. I showed him the notices, the repeated complaints, the timing. He raised an eyebrow. "Funny thing," he said. "All those reports came from the same contact number. I didn't even have to ask. That wasn't enforcement. That was harassment." That night I called a lawyer. A neighbor recommended Marcus Hale. Young, sharp, the kind of attorney who still gets excited when a document proves someone wrong. He reviewed my records and went quiet for a moment. "What you have," he said, "is leverage, real leverage." He explained it plainly. Pre-existing water rights don't magically disappear because an HOA prints rules on letterhead. Every fine, every notice, every forced inspection could be evidence, especially if it showed a pattern. "People like this don't stop," Marcus said. "They escalate. And when they do, they usually cross a line they can't walk back." As if on cue, the next escalation arrived by email instead of mail. The subject line read, "Immediate compliance required." Inside was a neatly formatted emergency policy update outlining new lake governance measures, access restrictions, revised usage standards, and a warning that non-compliance could result in liens against affected properties. Lines. I read it twice, then a third time, because part of me still couldn't believe someone would put that in writing without authority. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called within minutes, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "She just did you a favor," he said. "Threatening liens without jurisdiction isn't just invalid, it's actionable." Later that day at my kitchen table, Marcus traced a finger along a survey map I hadn't paid enough attention to before. "See this boundary?" he asked. "It doesn't stop where they think it does." The realization hit me slow, then all at once. A portion of the association's own shoreline work dock extensions, landscaping, even a private boat platform, sat on land tied to my family's original grant. Not leased, not permitted, just assumed. "They've been using it for years," Marcus said, "which means they've been trespassing." The irony would have been funny if it hadn't made me sick. Around that time, another neighbor stopped by. Harold Jensen, retired, cautious, the kind of man who chooses words like they cost money. He told me the association had quietly increased fees, redirected funds, approved expenditures, without full votes. "Most people don't look," Harold said. "They trust the board." But trust was starting to crack. Vanessa announced a special vote the following week, agenda packed with vague phrases like temporary stewardship authority and emergency resource protection. Marcus and I read it line by line. "She's setting this up so most residents won't understand what they're voting on," he said. "If it passes, she'll claim implied consent." Implied consent, the favorite tool of people who don't actually have authority. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't just about my dock anymore. It was about a system that survived because everyone felt alone. The meeting hall was packed again, but the atmosphere had changed. People whispered openly now. Printed agendas were being passed around with highlighted sections. Vanessa noticed it the second she walked in. Her performance hit different when the audience wasn't afraid. She spoke faster, sharper, leaving less room for interruption. She talked about liability, outside threats, unity, decisive action. And then she made the mistake she couldn't undo. She claimed the Homeowners Association had authority to manage water access across the entire lake during emergency conditions. I stood up calm, clear, no drama. "And who defines an emergency?" I asked. "And under what legal authority?" Silence. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind.